Stephen McClatchy, he answered a question from Senator Wade Mark with regards to OSHA, with regards to the Paria tragedy. And the answer he gave was interesting. Now, the question was pointed towards Paria fuel trading. The answer did not necessarily state, because I listened to the answer, he did not necessarily state that Paria fuel trading is directly one of the people involved. But basically, the minister went on to give us a definition of what OSHA and the laws and blah, 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 blah. I don't know why he needed to do all of that. To say that under that premise, OSHA has initiated legal proceedings with regards to the accident, the industrial loss of life that happened at Paria fuel trading, the tragedy so referenced. But he didn't say who necessarily the legal action was initiated against, just that there were court proceedings initiated with regards to offenses in the Paria fuel trading tragedy. Now, one daily newspaper, I think, makes the assumption that Paria is at least one of the defendants. Now, this action was initiated before the Commissioner Inquiry report was revealed. It was initiated in the December before. So it wasn't that much earlier. But the point is, the minister said that OSHA is acting independent of the Commission of Inquiry's findings. So the question is, who exactly have these court matters been taken against? Because based on the Commission of Inquiry, LMCS is, at least to some extent, liable for certain aspects of the health and safety part of the equation. That is to say, having the correct standards, making sure everybody has the correct qualifications, the processes are operating properly and are correct. They have all of the safety measures implemented, etc., etc. The actual rescue or lack thereof, that implementation of that one part of it, which one could argue is a significant factor in the deaths of the 4 individuals, divers. That is all on Paria. But the lead up, the contributing factors to the environment that led us to that point, LMCS is not necessarily off the hook. Neither, of course, is Paria, because both companies essentially signed off on a situation and said, yes, I agree, you agree, divers could go in under these circumstances, and we got what we got. Now, that is not necessarily to say that either party is guilty of anything specific. That is up to the courts to decide. But I'm wondering, who is OSHA going to, or who has OSHA gone after in this situation? Because when the situation happened, and I had my concerns, I was contacted by private individuals who basically, and technically speaking, correctly, identified some of the deficiencies of LMCS and why they should bear some, well, according to them, most of the liability. It started with them. However, to some extent, and I tried to explain at the time to the individual who I was in communication with, that I understand what he was saying, but there are certain responsibilities that Paria had that could never have been passed on to LMCS. In part because, one, it's their compound, so to some extent, there's certain liabilities when things happen on their compound. But more importantly, because it was their compound, they took control of the rescue, and there was no evidence to say, or rather, there was evidence that's contrary to the potential situation where the 4 divers died so quickly that any rescue effort would have been unfeasible. That's not what happened. Based on what we know, although it's not necessarily 100%, guaranteed, but based on what we know, Mr. Boudram left 4 living beings in the pipe because he knew that the best thing to do was not to stay with them because he wasn't sure, none of them were sure if rescue was coming or if anyone even knew where they were, so he had to go and seek help, which he tried to do, but help nevertheless never came. And that always, to me, was one of the major sticking points. It wasn't necessarily how the family was treated, had nothing to do with legal responsibility. That just was a bad look for Paria. But rather how the lack of a rescue was handled. So, again, now I do wonder, what OSHA, however, wants, and what the Commission of Inquiry recommended, I believe, for corporate manslaughter, those are kind of 2 parallel but separate situations you're looking at there. So it'll be interesting to see if we could get confirmation, because I watched the minister's response. He did not directly state Paria or LMCS are the subjects of the lawsuit with regards to offenses in health and safety that OSHA has initiated. Just that it has been initiated for this subject. So one could think, and to this, I to some extent will fault the minister, because the opposition, for its part, did ask a direct question, I believe, with regards to Paria, and we didn't necessarily get a direct answer, which again makes me wonder. And if the opposition didn't ask a direct question, still, it would have behooved the minister to prepare a much more effective and direct answer. But that's not what we got. It makes me think that we got a lot of padding and fluff and a lot of avoidance of having to state what's going on. Now, it's before the court, so maybe he can say who the defendants were. Although I do wonder to what extent would that necessarily matter. It's not as though some other entity not connected with the situation, because it's occupational health and safety, so it would have to be the employer and the contract holder, or the entity that awarded the contract, who's commissioned the work to be done. So my fear is that perhaps LMCS might be made a scapegoat in this part of the matter, or to a lesser extent that LMCS would not have to face scrutiny. As much as we would like to say, oh no, how could we put the poor father of one of the deceased through all of this again? Well, to some extent, the process is the process. I say this about the government. I have to be fair. I can't just say, well, Paria needs to get raked over the coals with the process from OSHA and LMCS does not. If we want to be fair, we're not always necessarily going to like what we have to do. That doesn't mean that the outcome, again, is guaranteed. All right, let's move on to the next story. And I'll be hitting this in 2 parts. So this first part, though, I wanted to ask this question up front, because we had a press conference yesterday from the Ministry of Health as well. I have a clip from it to play certain aspects. Of course, the head of the NWRHA was there. One of the things coming out of all of this is that the lawyers of the various parents who are involved in the NICU deaths are asking for medical records. And at one point, the minister, I believe, in Parliament was asked if independent or representatives of the families would be allowed to have a separate investigation into what happened. And the Minister of Health's response was, no, there's no room for that. And to some extent, I can understand that. Because while we all would have fears that public servants, members of the NWRHA, members of the Ministry of Health, etc., they might have an agenda. Technically speaking, they may have a reason to, or how should I put this? A bias for, incentives for protecting their employer. At the very least, it's something that I would want to ask, given the fact that, yes, there's an independent power investigation, but to some extent, that's going to take a while. I don't expect that to happen anytime soon. I don't know if it will happen fast enough to deal with the potential court matter that the lawyers for the parents are threatening. They have issued pre-action protocol letters. They have started the ball rolling. They intend to have a class action lawsuit. So, of course, the Ministry of Health will have an investigation, and potentially it will be fast-tracked, and the results of that investigation will be made available if the matter goes to court. The flip side to that is, if the parents have their own investigators, there's always a chance that, to some extent, they will just, whether they have good intentions or not, be biased against the Ministry of Health and the NWRHA and Port of Spain General and the NICU. We can't necessarily discount the fact that lawyers for the parents won't have an agenda, particularly because, not because of any nefarious scheme, but because this is a tragedy. They will empathize with the parents, and they will, at the very least, there's a chance of having subconscious bias. Not necessarily that it will be so. So I say all that to say that I understand at least, one possible reason why the minister would not want such a thing to happen. The other thing is, depending, I don't know if legally it's simple to just allow independent investigators access to Ministry of Health records and WRHA records, etc., right? It just might not be proper. However, there have been too many situations in the country where there's a perceived lack of transparency. And there have been too many situations that have left us with questions. So in the first instance, okay, is PARIA part of that court matter with OSHA? Is it not? What's going on with regards to all of the other aspects of just that one situation? Potential restitution to the families. Are they going to have to sue PARIA? Why is PARIA being allowed to determine what PARIA should do with regards to damages for the families of the deceased and the survivor? With regards to the Ministry of Health, while they don't necessarily have a big smoking gun, we don't know what the results of the investigations into the NICU are going to say. And we have heard some anecdotal testimony from one of the parents who is a nurse herself, but again, she has heightened emotions. To what extent is it just her perception? To what extent is it the truth? To what extent is what she's saying just the tip of the iceberg? There's no aspect of the public service and the government, in my opinion, or there are very few, that I think automatically will get the benefit of the doubt from the majority of the population. That's just the cost of what we've allowed our society to do to ourselves. Because we could blame public servants for their behavior, of which many callers point out it's not all public servants, right? And we could blame for how their supervisors and how the politicians oversee them. But to some extent, the people at the top, the ministers, etc., well, we voted for them in. So, in the long run, if there's any deficiencies in the culture of workplace in our public sector, we can't just blame the public sector. We have to look at ourselves as well. However, that doesn't mean that we then say, well, it's our fault, it's not their fault, so we could give them the benefit of the doubt. Trust, unfortunately, is one of those things that when broken, it's kind of hard to regain, and it's not up to the individuals who feel betrayed, to whatever degree you want to put it, to have to be the ones then to rebuild the trust. It's the other way around. Now I've said that I appreciate the Ministry of Health's handling of COVID, but I believe, every now and then questioned how they communicated some of the details. And COVID response is a politically charged issue around the world. So of course that alone will make people look at the minister and not necessarily want to trust what he had to say. Look at the NWRHA's head and not necessarily trust what he has to say. So when the lawyers of the family say, but we're not getting any information, this is not even just about an investigation, but what about the medical records of the deceased babies of their clients? I understand an investigator poking through medical records of a hospital, that has a lot of bad implications. What do you give him access to? Because there's a lot of confidential information of various individuals there. But shouldn't, and correct me if I'm wrong, shouldn't each individual set of parents be allowed the medical records of their deceased baby? And maybe there's a technical aspect that I'm not necessarily realizing. Maybe it's just because, you know, I myself am caught up in emotion, so I'm blinded by something very simple. So if anybody could figure out, call in later, let me know. But it seems as though, and this could just be the lawyers kind of setting the stage, and the ministry doesn't really have a good way to respond. There are questions with regards to information not being forthcoming. Again, an investigation would be a whole different matter. The lack of information to the parents involved, and this is something family members not getting information. Notice the trend there with Paria. They were locked out for the first day. And now we have a situation where at least some of the parents are saying, we don't know what happened to our babies. One mother says she had 2 death reports signed by 2 different doctors with not the exact same, but similar enough, one could argue, cause of death. But it just leads to too many questions. So, to what extent is how the ministry handling the situation in its entirety good enough for the rest of us? Because one of the issues that the minister has is the trust and confidence going forward with the rest of the public health system, not just with one unit of one hospital and one regional health authority, which already obviously is going to face an uphill battle. But we've seen reports now where expectant mothers in other regional health authorities, now they have been shaken up by what happened in Port of Spain. And they're looking at the public health system, rightfully or wrongfully, as something that they're uncertain of. But the minister needs to understand how they respond to it. It's not just about, unfortunately, it's not just about technically what is the legal thing to do. It should just be that, right? I get it. It should just be that. But part of what is the legal right thing to do is not necessarily what is the best thing to do in good faith. It is how to defend and protect the NWRHA and the Ministry of Health from any legal proceedings, regardless of if there is good cause or not. That's part of what the legal advice would be. Don't admit guilt if you're in a car accident. You ever heard that one before? Nowhere does it say about if you are guilty or not. The advice is not, if you're not guilty, don't admit guilt. The advice implies that you might very well be guilty. But that's what lawyers do. That's their job, to advise their clients. But the Ministry of Health is not a private interest. It's a public interest. And how they carry out their messaging is going to shape how we then perceive them moving forward after this event happened. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue the daily review. And then I'll go further into the minister's contribution to the public discussion on the NICU deaths later on in the program. Stay tuned. This is Talking About on WSN. We'll be right back after this. Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Coming soon to WESN.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. So we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren. Coming soon to WESN.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God. So we kind of at a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's been the victim,
right,
or the man has been the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI. Worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
Welcome back to Talking One. And I was speaking about the fact that families tend to not get a lot of information. We saw that to some extent what happened with Paria, where if you remember the initial video that was released, it appeared as though, the family members were on the side of the road and they were, fraught with anguish because they weren't being told anything, or at the very least that's what it looked like. Something is going on in parafuel trading and they're basically in a parking lot on the side of the road having to do a video under some questionable lights there to express their anguish, to try to find out something, to try to move somebody to do something for them. And then, of course, there's this current situation where it seems as though some of the parents and their legal representation is asking for medical records over their deceased babies. and it's not all forthcoming. Well, just to show how I think it's one of those things where perhaps it's a blind spot because we in TNT don't necessarily understand professional communication and professional customer service. And as someone whose family is in basically a business that is very much dependent on customer service, I could tell you it's not easy either way. But the family members of Hannah Mathura, they basically have said that they learned about the DNA test confirmation of her identity from the media. No one sought to inform them. And while it's not necessarily something that we don't hear about abroad, usually whenever you hear individual close to subject matter learned about certain aspects, details, or results through the media, it's more or less never a good look. Especially when it's not as though the family members were hostile to the investigation and were not cooperating. By all reports, they are cooperating. So it makes me wonder if nobody with regards to the investigating team thought, oh, the people who I have been questioning and who have been willing to answer my questions, who are at the center of this case, who at some point one would think they would have to claim the remains in order to have a proper burial, maybe it might be just courteous and professional to inform them before this comes out in the media. And granted, this is not necessarily the worst example of this. One could argue the Paria situation might be the worst example of it. One could argue the NICU death situation might be the worst example of it. This is not necessarily the worst example, right? But it is just simple aspects of courtesy that can make a big difference. And it also then potentially makes us want to ask now, where's our mindset with regards to, one, communication, two, our responsibilities to all stakeholders, three, just basic, I don't know, decent human respect, I don't know. And I get it. It's a complex case, it's a complex matter, but still, because we do also see the flip side in high-profile cases, or less than high-profile cases, where they say, well, they come out to give us the information after they inform the family. After all of the relevant stakeholders are informed, then the public is made to know. While I get it, it's not a priority. It does make me wonder where our priorities lie, because part of the priorities when you have a tragedy should be to do what you can to help the situation overall. And part of that is helping the family deal with the situation, whether we're waiting to see if they could be rescued or whether we're trying to identify the remains of what possibly could be a family member. So there's no rescue at this point. There's just the aftermath we're dealing with. And it seems as though, to some extent, this goes further with regards to individuals involved with whether it's private interests or government jobs, and they only get told about things after the fact, or phoned about their contract not being renewed while they're off on a work trip. That was the president of the industrial court. And that seemingly lack of professional courtesy, I think, is just a symptom that reveals a wider problem. But again, to some extent, it's not as though situations like this are brand new. This is a new generation of public servants that just happen to be the worst of the worst. No. While it didn't necessarily start off this way, I'm sure the professor from Chagonas would attest to, this is not a recent development where we look at our politicians and public servants and even people working in the private sector and say, oh gosh, they're snobbish, they're piggish, they're stuck up, they're entitled, they don't know how to speak to people. No, that all comes from our society because we've allowed it. We have not necessarily tried to correct it. We don't necessarily have to condemn it and brand it as evil, you know, and call out people and ostracize them for it. But we're not doing anything positive to change the momentum, to change the discussion, to change the nature of the game. And that's why the Secretary of Tourism in Tobago, just a minor example, could point to the fact of poor customer service in Tobago. But it's not like that's just limited to Tobago. We want to be taken seriously as a developing nation. At some point, we were on the cusp of being developed. I don't know what happened. Let's move on to the next story. This one is, dare I say, something that is near and dear to my heart, although it's not anything personal to me, but rather with regards to one of the aspects of constitutional reform which I have been speaking about for the last couple of years. The Minister of Public Utilities, Marvin Gonzalez, he, I guess you could say, has commented on the question about MPs being ministers. MPs in particular, because he is an MP and he has that experience. Senators who are ministers, it's not exactly the same question, although I would argue that we more or less, if we're going to make any changes, we should make it to both one time. We should not potentially leave that situation alone. Senators could be ministers and potentially make changes with regards to MPs. And the reason why he said that is, you know, it just might not be in the best interest for the representatives of each constituency to wear two hats, because you have work to do with the parliament. So there's parliamentary debates, you have to potentially attend joint select committee meetings, there are various committees, whether it's national security, public accounts, etc., etc. And then that's just part of being an MP. And that work is within Port of Spain. MPs then have to be represented throughout the country for their specific constituency, which obviously are the length and breadth of the nation. And then on top of that, to be the minister of a ministry. Well, he's basically admitting that things will slip through the cracks. Now, the point that he's making is regards to service of the constituents. He did say that MPs, their salaries are not adequate for the work that they have to do. And I won't disagree with him. I won't. To some extent, if we, and granted again, the professor might say, well, they're not supposed to be paid. It's not supposed to be a full-time job. Well, I guess unfortunately now, like everything else, systems have become more complicated as time goes on, and it is what it is. If we want to change how or what our parliamentarians are supposed to be doing, then we would have to make different changes anyway. But if we want them to operate how we expect them to operate now, I agree with the minister when he said that the monthly salary is too low and that it should be at a certain level if we want performance, because negative incentives is a thing. And unfortunately, I think he indirectly has revealed, well, yes, and that's why there's a minister, everybody almost in government bench is a minister. There's so many ministers in the ministry of. We don't always see or hear from them. And it could just be a way to give them a higher salary. And again, I don't like informal solutions to formal problems. It's not a proper fix. Because I will agree, okay, 20,000 and you're expected by your constituents to more or less be available. In some cases, 24/7. Whether that is rightfully so or wrongfully so. Some people might have an entitlement, a sense of entitlement with regards to their member of parliament. All right, fine. And if they're paid fairly, then we could have these expectations on them. Although at some point it does go to the realm of unreasonable. But if they are paid well enough, now how much is well enough, I don't know. That's a whole separate debate, right? Although I would argue that, you know, something close to what a minister makes. If we think members of parliament is an important job, and if we want to see performance, one could argue that what a minister makes currently may or may not be sufficient for a minister's portfolio. That's a separate matter. But back to the original point. Yes, okay, issues of payment, if you make ministers unable, MPs unable to become ministers, that would have to be addressed, right? Get a proper solution to that situation. But again, and he points out, how many times do people complain that the MP is never wrong? Now, interesting enough, to what extent does that also happen to the opposition bench? And when I say opposition bench, I don't just mean UNC MPs, but also when PNM is in opposition, PNM MPs. Right? To what degree does that happen to those who are not ministers? Not all government MPs are ministers. I do believe. I could be wrong, but I do believe not all of them are ministers. So, I don't know if it's going to solve the problem, but it will take away one of the big reasons / excuses. For sure. Unfortunately, in our political situation, individual performance doesn't seem to matter. And there's nothing to hold MPs, regardless of whatever other responsibilities they have, to account. Because we, the voters, do not reward individual performance. We will say that this person was the best MP and the best minister. Oh, they're the best. But at the end of the day, yeah, Jack Warner won once under the ILP, and then he lost afterwards. And a person could be extolled of their virtues, and when they leave their party, all of a sudden they become a pariah. Nobody wants to touch them. All of the supporters said they're the best, they're the best, they're the best. Something happens, they have a disagreement with executive leadership, they go, and then all of the love disappears, like the Naipaul Kuhlman report, case files. So, I agree with the minister. But I do think we need to take a hard look at ourselves as well. This is the other common theme. Because it's not necessarily going to solve all of the problems. And one of the largest issues we have are all of the consequences that come from the fact that we just vote party, we don't vote candidates. That's why our politics are so tribal. Because the individuals don't matter, except maybe the political leader. And even then, does not always seem to be the case. All right, let's take a break. We'll get back and hear from the Minister of Health some of the things he had to say when we return. Stay tuned.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there next to himself. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have 2 of the 3 species of anteaters right here.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. You don't need, we can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and, I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
It is unfortunate that the issue, whilst of great national importance, it is unfortunate that it has now been politicized, and politicized to a point where if we don't treat with the misinformation out there, it can threaten not only the public healthcare system, but also the private healthcare system. The public healthcare system also, without question, accepts every single sick baby, sick neonate, premature baby, freely into our neonatal intensive care units without question. Why? Because the private sector does not have the capacity, never did. It is only recently that one private sector institution instituted 2 neonatal intensive care units, beds, 2. We accept all, with the Port of Spain Maternity Hospital, NICU, being the reference one for the country. We have 92 NICU beds across our public healthcare system. Private sector has 2. Which they only developed recently. The reason why I'm saying this is that in addressing some of the unfortunate reporting, it was said that a possible source of the infection was from a private facility, Sanjivini. May I state here now categorically, we have received no babies from that institution. And that's why I say if we don't treat with this issue, it has the potential of affecting private sector operations. Another private sector hospital being called is St. Clair Medical, where it was said that because the baby belonged to a certain ethnic group, that we allowed 7 people free rein in the NICU. May I tell the public that no such event happened. And it is unfortunate that facts in this modern era get no currency. These babies are very, very ill. Many are even born with congenital birth defects. And that is being lost in the equation. That have, and Dr. Timothy will talk about it, very little rates of survival. I noticed that it is being said by the opposition that if the Couva Hospital was opened and the NICU was operating, this may not have happened. I have a brief from UDICOT, which says, as far as the Couva Hospital is concerned, there was no NICU. It was a children's hospital. It was a 4-bed special care baby unit for less urgent cases.
That was the minister at yesterday's press conference where, I mean, that last part might seem confusing to some people, but neonatal care and pediatrics is not exactly the same thing. So one of the things that he did say was that Port of Spain General does not have a full pediatrics department. With the new construction going on, they're going to basically, implement a full department. They did have a stage 3 NICU, but, births and pregnancy and pediatrics for children, that is, I believe, 2 separate specialties, more or less. And thus, he points out to the fact that based on a report that he has claimed to have received, Couva Children's Hospital did not have a NICU, which takes the winds out of the sails of those who will point to that hospital as being, well, if this was up, this would have never happened. But regardless, as I said yesterday, well, again, the resources, the supplies, the doctors, the nurses will be sourced from the same source, more or less, right? So why will it necessarily be better than? Now, one of the things with regards to this, the catch-22 is, I understand fear and uncertainty with regards to medical situations. When the pandemic happened, intellectually, my mind said we should all take the vaccine. But I'd be lying to say that when I actually had to take it, was like 100% confident that this is the best thing ever, I will be fine, nothing wrong will happen, there was a lot of uncertainty. And I had questions. I wanted my elderly or older parents to take the vaccine and older people to take the vaccine, but obviously when that time came, I had a lot of uncertainty for them. And I was wondering, and I had doubts, is this the best course of action? Because at the end of the day, nothing is guaranteed with regards to medical science. Because as much as it's rooted in science, its practice is in some ways kind of, not exactly, but kind of like an art form, though rooted in science. Because at the end of the day, human judgment has to try to figure things out over a myriad of possibilities and figure things out with a myriad of consequences or outcomes. Not everybody responds to drugs the same way. So it wasn't that I felt as though the vaccine itself was a great evil, but that at the end of the day, you never know what could happen, right? One of the things, of course, is the damaged to the healthcare system. And the minister pointed out it's not just public, it's also private, because really and truly, part of the human condition is when we hear about tragedies with regards to babies and newborns, even if it wasn't a situation where the NWRHA now has to have an investigation into the NICU unit at Port of Spain General. All expectant mothers and fathers will hear about the bad statistics. They could just be statistics. And doubt will start to creep in, and fear will start to creep in. Let's not forget that there was a time when childbirth was a lot riskier, and children were not guaranteed to reach adulthood. It's expected now, and thus we kind of take it for granted how complex those things are. So the question is, of course, has it been too politicized? I'll say this, I think, again, the opposition went a little bit too far, wanting to then hammer the Hoover Hospital situation home. And the minister pointed out, it's not as though it's mothballed. It's been open. There were surgeries carded for that day when there were protests, and the protests disrupted the hospital's operations and prevented cataract surgery for 20 individuals, which was postponed by another day because they did not schedule them for the following day, Sunday. Now, I do have to question, it didn't seem like it was a great protest that surrounded the hospital. You know, is it that, I have never gone to Hoover's Hospital, I've driven past it, I don't know, is it that there's only one entrance? Is there, and then could not some facilitation have been made? Maybe call the police and say, listen, they could protest, they just need to not block the gate so that the hospital operations could continue. Because I have no issue with you protesting, whether I agree with you or not. But if it did impact the operations of a hospital, I can't necessarily agree with it going to that extent. But as I was leading up to, why did we just throw in the towel and say, well, there's a protest, so there's nothing we could do? Is it that health officials are now a little too sensitive with how it will look, and they don't want to do anything that might make it seem as though they're trying to censor the protesters? Well, you combat that with good information. You say up front what's happening. You report it to the media up front. And then you do it. And you make sure that the people who do the job, they don't take an extra step. We just need the protesters to move off to the side so that patients could come to the hospital. So that doctors and nurses and administrators and pharmacists and all other workers could come to the hospital. But it has become a political issue or political circus. To some extent, we should expect the lawyers of the families involved to do whatever they can within reason, but within reason does not necessarily mean that it won't be beneath them to take advantage of public sentiment. So they'll do everything they can for their clients. The rest of the nation is technically not their clients. Never forget that. We can't make that assumption. If they act completely above board, well, fine. But we're not their clients. Their clients are the parents who just lost babies. And this political dimension now, well, I want to know, who do you trust? Trust with regards to our public health service is just one of those things. We all have family members who don't like to go to hospitals in general. Then there are people who don't want to trust the Minister of Health and the Public Health Service specifically. But in this situation, who do you trust? Do you trust what the families have been saying, what their legal representation has been saying? Do you trust the head of the NWRHA and the Minister of Health, what they've been saying? What about all of the pundits that have offered their opinions? Dr. Fuad Khan, political leader of the NTA, Michaela Pandey, the opposition, parts of the government. Who do you trust? Members of the media, editorials in morning papers, let me know. Call in and let me know. Because it will speak to how we perceive various important aspects of our society, as well as various and important aspects of our systems of government, whether it's the government itself, their formal opposition, the informal members of the political environment, and the fourth estate, the media. Because this is a complex matter, and we can't necessarily expect quick and easy answers. And it very may likely be a situation where we're not necessarily going to like the answer. But the truth doesn't have to be what we like. That's the catch. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes is lost when we get into these high-profile, emotionally charged, controversial situations. So now everyone is looking at all neonatal deaths and wanting to link it. And I understand the sentiment. We shouldn't just automatically link it. Although I disagree with the NWRHA, we should also not just automatically and assume it's separate. But we need to give the investigators time to do their job. Now, there was more I wanted to say with regards to politics in the country and have that discussion with Keaton Shaw. And it seems as though perhaps some of those political rumblings might have cooled off after last week. Some, not all. But we'll have to, of course, wait until he could participate for that conversation. Maybe we'll have it this week, maybe not. And there's some other things that I want to get into, but we need to take a break. When we come back, we open the phone lines. I want to hear from you, the viewer. Stay tuned. This is Talking About WSN. We'll be right back after this.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN Content Capital.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break a balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of the
not no.
Let's go to the last part.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh, available at all the Home Store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue, St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street, Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop, Ariapita Avenue, Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
Welcome back to Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen. Now is the time we open the phone lines. We want to hear from you, the viewer. Call in and have your say. And I asked earlier, who do you trust with regards to this NICU matter? What commentary, what source of information, what public speaker, what official do you trust with regards to this situation? Because to some extent, I believe it will reveal how we view a lot of the various parties involved. And this is an important matter, in part because the stakes are so high when it comes to healthcare. And to some extent, the Ministry of Health may actually be, believe it or not, one of the better performing ministries in the country. Maybe. We have our first caller, Digger Martin, on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on here.
Good morning, good morning. And let me answer your question. Because based on precedent set, I don't trust the current Ministry of Health for a number of reasons. There is issues in the public health system. And let me tell you something that is happening currently at the Mount Hope NCRHA. They don't have chemicals, they don't have reagents to basically do medical tests. So when you go to consultation in the clinic, the doctor cannot give you a comprehensive analysis. And that is a fact. I'm talking to you on facts. Now, why does the minister say he doesn't want to politicize it? And he's politicizing it by not allowing an independent person chosen by the parents to be part of the investigation. What will that do? Why is he hedging? If you're honest to yourself, let it be open and pragmatic. And if these people have an expert to sit on there, why not let them in? Because you have to take their view as to what has happened. You don't want a massive probe. A massive probe was done, and I don't believe the whistleblower is part of it. So as far as I'm concerned, that is a non-issue. The other critical thing I want to say, wasting parliamentary time again and the commission and inquiry motion that is brought to amend it. They continue, and I'm seeing an independent Mr. Paul going down that road. If we are faithful and we are honest, we have a system now. If the players, particularly the current government, wants to be honest ourselves, they will optimize the commission inquiries, deliverables. And I will tell you, there's a platitude of a number of them that have mashed it up. Let me go back to, why crime is being committed now. Out of the commission of inquiry for the coup, they said it's to establish at NOC. That would establish. And that is basically to connect all these national security apparatus to go after possible people doing crime. Look what we had yesterday. We had another imitation police activity. How long that has been going on? You know why that has happened? That has happened because I suspect it is somebody within national security know the weaknesses of national security and is using it to advantage. 3 Commission of Inquiries gave us delivered the Procurement Act. You know what happened to the Procurement Act? They mash it up. If they had done it as it was supposed to be in 2015, 2016, you know how much money we would have saved? 8 by 5 billion, that's 40 billion. Because that is what Munilal Lalchan said. If we have a very rigid procurement, we could save the country 5 billion based on corrupt practices. You know what we were going to do? We're going to borrow 10 billion. When if the procurement legislation would have established, we'd have saved the country of that. That is the things that is happening. We set up another. The only commission of inquiry I believe has failed is the one with the Mosquito Creek investigation, where the commissioners say, look, the government is serious. But all the rest of commission of inquiries had broad deliverables, and one government who is currently sitting mudball it. Look at the CLICO. Why? You have an investigation. There is apparent things inside there for criminal charges. And you're sitting on it, and you come in to waste parliamentary time and my time to say you want to amend it because we're not getting no progress. Those independent senators who bring in this motion should be honest to themselves. I'm going to have a nice morning.
Thank you, Kola. It's an interesting point you made with regards to the Commission of Inquiries. Because, yes, to some extent, they seem inept now. But then again, we could replace it with something which could be undermined by political interference, as one could argue is the case currently, and then we'd be no better off, except we would have spent money on exercise which wouldn't necessarily net us any benefit. We actually going on the line. Good morning, caller, you're on the air.
Good day, Jess.
Morning, morning.
How about in government? And recently I read where it was costing some colossal sum to maintain the refinery that they closed down. Mm-hmm. And then it was revealed, no, that was wrong, because they employed a private firm, Demas, to maintain it. Why did they do that? You have Heritage, and Heritage could easily do it at minimal cost. And this is the problem in this country. Now we talk about Gonzalez talking about MPs, so be government ministers. I totally disagree with him. The best people for being ministers is the members of parliament. Will have at their...
Caller, you're breaking up. Caller?
Okay, what about call back?
Try again. Try make any point with regards to what Minister Gonzalez said.
Yes. He don't seem to understand what is the role of a minister. A minister is to get the views of the public servant in running their ministry. And they recently had a report from the parliament, right, with no idea of where we have no report. And the report doesn't address the major problems with water. As I mentioned, cancer should never have a problem because the water rate is supposed to be right? To talk about this, what is him to forget? These things were supposed to be full time.
Caller, you're breaking up too much towards the end there. So I'll have to ask you to call back. If you don't mind. I don't know what's wrong with the connection. Caller? Okay. All right. So hopefully he calls back and get a stronger connection. I mean, sometimes a private enterprise could actually do the work cheaper, right? It all depends. So I wouldn't necessarily question with regards to who's doing the work on the refinery. With regards to your views on what a minister's job is supposed to do, to what extent is that the case now? Maybe the job devolved rightfully or wrongfully. But I'm interested to hear what else you have to say. In the meantime, going back to the previous caller from Diego Martin's comments, yes, of course, the caller claims that NCRHA, North Central, did not have regions to conduct certain tests, right? So you need regions as part of the tests with regards to whatever chemical test that you have to do to help identify what's going wrong, to diagnose a person's condition, etc., etc. The thing is, one of the reports from the NICU situation was that, you know, one of the mothers or one of the families had to buy a blood filter when their child needed a blood transfusion. It was reimbursed, but the question then comes into play, why did they not have one available and needed the financial resources of the family at the time to do so? Because it was reimbursed. So why didn't the NWRHA, Port of Spain General, just buy it up front? Why did they need to send the family members to see about it? I don't know if maybe it's the culture of how we do our administration and supplies and logistics for medicine. I had a similar situation, but I was in private. I believe it wasn't public. So it's not necessarily pertinent here. But we do have to wonder to what extent, and I know that there were supply shortages in some health centers for certain basic things like gloves. You know, to what extent is this an issue? So far, it seems that the Ministry of Health has been able to manage, but that is relative. Doesn't necessarily mean it was managing well, but the length and breadth of it we might not be aware of. For better or worse. We have a remoney line. Good morning, caller. You're on here.
Morning.
Morning, morning.
The first thing I want to do is to state that there are some very hard-working people in the hospitals, right? Some nurses, doctors, wardsmen. But management is the problem. And the problem now is lack of resources and priority with the spending of the money. Because you can't tell me we're having this problem with these babies. And it's a bacterial thing. This thing's supposed to be fumigated on a regular basis. So for that bacteria to be growing inside of it, that means that somebody was sleeping on the job. When you look at the resources, that is the problem. But we have a greater problem, you know. And watching the last conversation with the Prime Minister when the young man asked him about employment, and he tell him, well, get in line. What the Prime Minister is supposed, what the youth man is supposed to ask him is, when you extend your retirement age to 65, right? And then you're not filling the vacancies that is required in the public service. Because right now my school is short of an IT teacher and I don't know when we go get one. But people, children, being down to do this subject. There are vacancies in the public service that must be handled immediately. And instead of these fellows pagaring and wasting money on conferences with other leaders in the Caribbean when they could do it on Zoom, but you're hosting them here. What benefit the taxpayer gain from that? We have to get our priorities in line. And furthermore, no MP who is in the parliament. Have you ever seen an MP ask a constituent their views on a subject? We vote for them, you know, but they don't serve us. And this is the part of the Constitution that had to change. The right to recall. And the fact that the MP really shouldn't be holding a ministerial post because you're not coming to the people you're representing to find out what they want or what they think. You go in with the party say. And most of the times what the party saying it is be wrong. Have a good day, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. That's a good question there. Technically, no. I have never heard of nor seen. Usually what you do is you see them for elections. And yes, then they might ask for the views, but it's not in the context of, well, I'm asking you your views for where to spend money. No, you're asking views for a campaign so that I know what to promise. Are those promises kept? Maybe sometimes, not always, sometimes. That's the only time when you get that interaction that I have heard of. Sometimes to the detriment of the politician, but I'll save that for later. We have Shagonas back on the line. Good morning, caller. Caller?
Yeah.
Yeah, morning. You're on here.
Yeah. I think in this line, because I couldn't get on the next line.
Okay.
Anyway, what I was saying is that members of parliament never used to get paid. They used to get an allowance for the time off to go to the house because it was not supposed to be a full-time job. These people have made it a full-time job because they have made work program to pay themselves these exorbitant salaries. Right? That, and secondly, they don't seem, what he said, they don't have the authority to deal with the agencies involved. That isn't true. There's a public service system. I have gone through that already where people are supposed to put up the annual report showing what problems they have and whatnot. Right? And as I said, the report on WASA that the Parliament produced, it appears it was produced without public service input, or if it was, it is being hidden. And that is the cause of the problem. Any question before?
Well, Professor, I do have to ask though, there's a system in the public service, but what if there's aspects of the public service which are potentially undermining the system?
No, it's not the public service. It's the ministers who do it. Right? It's the ministers. They're the one who's supposed to provide oversight.
Right.
And they're not doing it. They're not doing it.
No, but like take the report on WASA, right? It seems as though the union is at odds with what the minister wants to accomplish.
Do with the union?
Well, when I say the union, some of the employees in WASA might not be on board because
it doesn't matter. They have to put up the annual administrative report. WASA have to do that, and WASA have to sit down and say what is their problem. And we're not seeing it. We had water in this country for years, right? And we never had a problem with money. And the reason was that the water authority used to work. Before they go into an area, they would work out the economics of whether it would pay. Then some donkey politician come up with water for all. And regardless of where people is, they put it on the system. Now you could have gone on the system before, you know. But if you was not within the distance to get proper connection, you had to pay the extra cost. And they stopped that. And the reason they stopped it was a certain politician in South Trinidad who wanted to get this thing. And all these problems boil down to politicians not doing oversight. Oversight is to get the law done, not your hidden agenda. Any questions?
No. Thank you, Professor. You raise an interesting point. And I also am asking, we may have forgotten, who do you trust with regards to this public health matter? The minister himself admits, or health officials have admitted, it's a matter of public importance, but the question is, who do you trust in the matter? And this might be something that I might be asking this throughout the week, if anything, because this situation, how it unfolds, no, to some extent, it kind of caught us by surprise. 7 deaths in a very brief span of time is a bit alarming. The other deaths that the lawyers are also looking into may not be connected and may not necessarily, be part of a situation that is reasonable to say is alarming. Although I would say at this point, we should double check everything, cross T's, dot I's, etc., etc. So who do you trust? But Professor, what he said that MP, the job of an MP was not supposed to be a full-time job. It's supposed to be a part-time job. You had an allowance to take time off to represent. Now, in a strange way, it actually kind of makes sense, right? Because if you, as a member of your community, are a working member of society that has an actual ordinary day job, you yourself will be more connected to the lives of the people of TNT. And if you are in an ivory tower as a government official that doesn't interact with the people on a daily basis, then you could be disconnected and you could be taking for granted some of the challenges and issues that everyday people have to face every day. So what the professor is saying actually is not without merit. Granted, of course, when you add joint select committees and stuff, and it would not be appropriate for, if we separate ministers from MPs, for ministers to be in the joint select committee. The joint select committee is, committees are an opportunity for the members of parliament and senators, as essentially the legislative body who also represents the will of the people, to now ask questions of the specific bodies, right, that are responsible for the various aspects of public service and government. And in the States, you see not just technocrats, but elected or appointed officials also being brought before their various committees. To some extent, it would be nice to see that ministers are brought before more regularly the committees, but unfortunately, the way how politics are, we're not really going to see that happen, right, for the most part. But it's interesting. In a strange twist of fate, it may be more effective, not just to separate the job of a minister from an MP, but also to say, hey, this full-time gig thing is not a thing. You need to understand how the world works, not understand how politics works. And I think therein lies the problem. We have a political class that spends more time trying to figure out the game of politics in TNT. And then when it comes time now to debate issues in Parliament, sometimes it seems as though they don't fully understand what's going on. They don't have a perspective rooted in reality. They could parrot what you tell them, but knowing a thing is much different than just being able to repeat words on a subject. Experiencing a thing is even more different than just merely knowing the details of what may or may not happen to someone else. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't expect that the Committee on Constitutional Reform is even going to consider making MPs part-time. I don't. Right? To some degree, we have to ask, is our nation grown and have the various systems become so complex that that's not really viable anymore? But I have to admit, I do like the idea that the MP has to worry about his own business or is an employee in a company. It would be cool to see an MP who is also working in a supermarket or working as a bank teller. That's their day job. And then they go and be members of parliament to debate on bills. And it's not taking days and days and days, and we have 45 minutes or an hour or however long per speaker, and a lot of it is fluff and political grandstanding. And I think that's the other part of the thing. Because it's now a full-time job, they have to pad their time. But unfortunately, a lot of what politics is now with regards to when they communicate with us, I think is fluff and time padding, whether it's from the government side or the opposition side. But I will leave that there. Management problem in the Ministry of Health, lack of resources in the Ministry of Health, lack of resources around the board. $5 billion saved if we don't have corruption. That would not necessarily be enough to make up the shortfall, but it would be a start. It just goes to show what I have said before. We can't afford the level of corruption that we have anymore. Do we want to see better? Well, it makes no sense complaining about politicians and then waiting on them to fix what we think are the problems. If we don't necessarily trust them, we don't have faith in them, we might have faith in some. We're not all diehards, And we don't, even one could argue the diehards, have faith in all. So why are we kind of just hoping and wishing and praying that somehow magically people that we do not have 100% faith in as a collective are going to somehow get the best solution for us? And that's why I started the show saying we can't really be waiting a month before the election to start talking about the politics in the country in a major way. I had a conversation with Dr. Shay Mohammed. Tomorrow I will have a different guest. Our good lady, she has been unavailable. She took personal time. She had to go abroad to deal with some personal matters. She should be back within a couple of weeks to be on talking point. So this week we'll have a different guest to speak about various topics in the political sphere as somebody in the center of part of it. But we as the voters, we need to start asking questions. We need to kind of peel away our assumptions. Every now and then I have to reassess what I think about a politician, what I reassess about what I think about a public persona, and ask ourselves, even if we don't like the options, what is the best option? Not the option that is the least bad, but what is the best? Those things are not necessarily always going to be the same. Today is a good day to have a good day. Make it a good day, as my co-host always says. If you believe in TNT, then it is your responsibility to do so for yourselves, for your friends and family. I still believe so. That's why I am here. Never forget our allegiance to the Republic. We will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
WESN.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Coming soon to WESN.
Pastor Jay, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say, we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right, so here we are about to hear the second time Pastor Jay wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this